MRTD approved the supplemental agreement at their meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we're submitting that for City Council consideration. Again, we're referencing it up to $1.5 million. The city won't be obligated to go beyond that. We'll be holding those dollars as trust on behalf of the MRTDD. And then we're not subject to that time limit of 2.5 years to expend these dollars. We'll be able to hold those 5, 10, 15 years if there's a future issue that arises. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
Questions for John? Julie?
So the check that we get, then we invest that money somewhere, and how do we hold it?
Well, we haven't really decided if that goes into an escrow or how that gets done, but the idea would be that we would want to invest that, right? If we're going to hold that towards some kind of a future use, the city could hold it in a non-interest-bearing account, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. So we would invest that in a interest-bearing account, and we still need to discuss and sort of weigh out whether that's an escrow or whether those dollars are made available something prior to that. We just haven't really resolved that portion of it yet.
And I guess who would be making that decision?
City Council ultimately needs to make that decision.
There's no other questions. First reading, please.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor of City of Rolla, Missouri to execute on behalf of the City of Rolla, Missouri, a supplemental intergovernmental cooperation agreement between the City of Rolla, Missouri and the Move Rolla Transportation Development District.
John, when do we want to bring back that recommendation? I mean, the recommendation is how to hold the money, basically.
Yeah.
When do we want to bring that back? I'd say while the subject is fresh in everybody's mind, we ought to bring it back.
Yeah, I
sooner.
agree.
Okay.
The TDD board may not spend those dollars for another 2 years. I mean, there was nothing pressing as to when we get the deposit, but you're right. While it's fresh in people's minds, I think we ought to address that.
Does it require bids if you're going to invest?
We do now. We get quotes on investments and secured collateral.
Next item is a motion approving a two-year extension, which is allowable under the current agreement with the current law firm of Williams, Robinson, Ritter, and Buchos for the city councilor services.
Yeah, so in your packet under page Roman numeral 4B3 is a copy of the existing 2-page agreement that we executed with the law firm in January 2017. It was a 3-year agreement and stipulated 2 one-year extensions. That is expiring at the end of this year. We've consulted with the law firm. As we indicated a few years ago, they've done very good legal service for the city of Rolla, and they're holding their price. So the proposal is an extension of the 2 years. And at that time, for sure, we would go out for new proposals. They would have every right to apply at that time or to submit, but I think it is good business to go out and open that up for the market every so many years. So our recommendation is a motion to extend.
Any questions, David?
Just a quick one. I was reading 2019 through 2019 and provided for 2 one-year extensions. We're just deciding to take that into a full 2 as opposed to 2 1 years.
That's what I'm recommending. The council could do 2 one-year actions. I'm recommending a 2-year, but it's entirely up to council. I like locking the rate in for 2 years.
Yeah, I think the 2 years is a good idea. Last time we only had one other firm that showed any interest, and that at least one of the attorneys in that firm is now a judge, so they might be interested, but.
There's no other question. Is there a motion to approve the extension?
So move.
Second?
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. The next item is ordinance amending section 30-16 of the code pertaining to marijuana possession.
Chief brought to our attention that section 30-16 of our city code, which obviously declares possession of marijuana to be a violation of the law, did not or does not provide an exception for the medical marijuana, which was authorized by Amendment 2 and approved by the Missouri voters a year or so ago. So the only change in this language at all is under section 30-16. And we just added the 2 or 3 sentences under the subsection A that literally defines qualifying patient or caregiver. It's the only change to this ordinance. So we're proposing to a first reading at this time and and bring back for final reading at the next meeting.
Any questions for John or the chief? Matthew?
John, just a technical question. You know, when we saw the changes in the other ordinance, you know, we had things underlined, things crossed out. How come we didn't do that here where we can easily tell what we're changing?
We should have done that. No real reason other than it was just that one section, and you're right, it would have been easier to underline. So it literally is the, I'm sorry,
It's just the first paragraph.
yeah, just the first paragraph, except for the,
And the addition of except, nothing's been deleted.
yeah,
This is the first reading, so for the second reading, could we have it?
yeah.
I've got a question.
Jody?
Well, actually, I have a couple questions, I guess. So, can a person have more than 35 grams with the medical marijuana program?
56 grams.
And so, is that a problem?
You mean for
Is there a-
medical marijuana?
Yeah. Is there a separate, it says quantity less than 35 grams. What happens if you have more than 35?
The city can't charge you if you have more than 35.
Is that a state?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Can you
So,
repeat that? Just the answer.
So the city's authority is only for a misdemeanor, which is technically 35 or less. So if it's anything more than that, it would be a state issue, and that would be a state ordinance that would have to be changed. Or state, also state law.
okay. So my second question is, I understand that we're only looking at paragraph A as changed, but down in section C there, it talks about drug paraphernalia being all equipment designed for use in planting, propagating, cultivating, growing, harvesting, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. Are the people who get permits to do cultivation and so forth are going to have that stuff? Does this, is that a problem? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would think it would be if I had one of those
Yeah, because
permits, but-
clearly, if you have an exception for the medical marijuana, the paraphernalia is a part of that and is authorized by the law. But is that,
We might want to add under the drug paraphernalia, since it's two separate charges. One is based on weight and the quantity of the product, and the second is based on what defines paraphernalia. I'm not sure of anything in the constitutional amendment or the readings of that defines what paraphernalia would be, but I could look at, and I would probably suggest that you might want to make a similar exception under the paraphernalia. So there might be some things defined as paraphernalia that might still be considered illegal. I don't, growing, harvesting, there are certain things with the license that you may or may not be able to do. I know there's limitations, so I don't know if you just want to reference unless allowed by
Permit.
the
permit,
statute
yeah,
or the
yeah,
permit
whatever.
use or something like that, but I think
Yeah.
that you might want to clarify it, but there still are probably some things under the paraphernalia that would not be allowed with the
Right.
license, but I
Right.
just don't know what they are. off the
Yeah,
top of
it
my head.
just, it seemed like that there was some clarity needed there that maybe we need to look
Yeah,
at.
because I think the license, I don't want to guess right now, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
How do you differentiate on certain drug paraphernalia, what could be used for pot versus what could be used for tobacco? So the police pull somebody over with a pipe, a bong, or whatever.
There's typically, they may presume that it's, I'll just give an idea, and the chief can clarify this, but if they find something that they believe to be paraphernalia, typically it has to be tested and prove that an illegal substance was present. Is that correct?
Okay. Any other questions?
I was just going to say, we'll definitely find some
Matt might
clarification on the drug
have
paraphernalia
that.
portion,
Yeah.
and we'll outline all that for the next final reading.
My question is, I'm looking at the penalty provisions for this, and I know that's not what we're getting at, but I'm just curious. Under state law, if I possess 10 grams or less of marijuana, it's a fine-only offense. But here, I can be imprisoned for 90 days or be sentenced to a fine and imprisonment. So
What I'm thinking, Matt, is this has never been changed to update with the criminal code.
I think we should update this to be
We're gonna,
cohesive with,
we're gonna talk about that
Okay.
next. I mean, that's part of the next conversation, I think.
oh, is it?
But that is a good point as far as this ordinance, want it to be, you're suggesting that it should be the same as the current criminal code as far as an offensive.
Right, I don't think it should be more harsh than the state ordinance or the state laws regarding possession of small amounts of marijuana.
So the next item, we don't know the timeline or the if. So should this suggested change be incorporated into this one prior to the final reading?
Well,
And I don't think we should wait for the other one. The other one may or may not happen.
right. I think that Councilman Crowell makes a good point that the punishment, if the group believes so, I mean, should, not recommending whether it should or shouldn't, but it seems as if this was supposed to reflect what the maximum punishment is, or actually it's less than what the maximum punishment used to be under the criminal code for the state. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, you think this shouldn't be any more harsh than what the state would do for the same or similar offense.
Right, and of course, under the state law, there's a distinction between 10 grams or less or 10 to 35 grams. 10
And
grams
that's
or,
newer too.
yeah, 10 grams or less is a fine-only offense.
Yeah.
You cannot go to jail for that if it's your first time. And then 35 grams would be, I believe it's a misdemeanor, so you could go to jail for that. So I'm just saying, if someone gets caught with 10 grams or less, I don't think the punishment should be more severe in the city than it is in the state.
So are you, I'm guessing just, because I haven't been here for some of these earlier discussions on this, this just starts at 35. Are you thinking there should be a distinction between 10 and 35 for the municipality as well? Because that would be,
I don't know that our state legislature deemed it necessary that there be a distinction between up to 10 grams and 10 grams to 35 grams. I don't know that that distinction is that important and whether I care that much about that distinction. But because there's up to 10 grams carries with it only a fine, I don't think the city should be seeking more than just a fine. At least on up to 10 grams, and quite frankly, up to 35 grams, I think should be fine only.
Right. And based on our next discussion, that's gonna maybe decide what goes into here. Is that what I'm hearing also?
well, that's part of the discussion, but the distinction between 10 and 35, I mean, this ordinance, I think, was based on the fact that the old criminal code said 35 grams. 35 was a misdemeanor, anything over 35 was a felony. Now they've redefined all of those levels, and this ordinance wasn't brought up to date before that, so. There
So
hasn't been really any discussion about that distinction before.
Right, but we clearly ought to factor that part of it in if that's part of the new criminal code. So we'll look at all that and bring it back for the next meeting.
Okay, yeah. It sounds like there's a lot of elements to it that maybe need.
Any other questions? So the changes coming back the second time are going to be what?
The way I'm understanding them is a distinction on the weight between 10 and 35, at least as far as punishment. And then there's going to be some addition that, under the drug paraphernalia, that ties it to what's legal versus illegal with the passage of the constitutional amendment. But I can't quite think of what wording would be the best way to do that. But my understanding is the council wants, if paraphernalia, what used to be paraphernalia, is allowed for somebody with the medical license, that it should still be allowed in the municipal ordinance as well. Is that correct?
Yep.
So, for that.
Any other questions? Do we want to have the first reading and then come back with amendments, or do we want to set it aside so you can come back?
Set aside.
Set it
Yeah,
aside.
there's gonna be enough change, there might be.
So
Yeah.
is there a motion to set this aside?
So moved.
Second.
Made and second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Next item. Then Councilperson Jones, I want to say 3 months ago-ish, maybe 4 months ago, requested that the city evaluates the decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana. I think that term decriminalization was a little more nuanced than perhaps he thought it would be at the time, but in any event, we're following through on that. And if you remember at the time, said we were going to go through sort of a gated approach. The first gate was, what are the legal capabilities of the city as a third-class city, not home rule charter? So Carolyn is going to present the legal opinion as to what it is that we can do, what it is that we can't do.
All right. I think Lance Thurman prepared the legal opinion. I hope everybody had a chance to read it, and I'll try my best to answer any questions that come from that. But basically, I think one of the important points to make is that the term decriminalization, I don't think it's a misnomer. It does not accurately apply to what is allowed or not allowed here. So, that being said, is the city does not have the authority to say, in our municipality, we are not going to consider this to be a criminal act. So that, because, I mean, the chief of police, sheriff's department, law enforcement agencies, they have an obligation to follow the laws of the state. We as a municipality, as we talk about frequently, are allowed to sometimes narrow those or sometimes make them more broad, but we can't say it doesn't exist here in our municipality. So decriminalization is not really an accurate term. That being said, I think that it should be noted as well that law enforcement, as well as the prosecutor, will have discretion if they want to turn a case over to the state for prosecution. There's discretion to do that, because if it's illegal, if it's something that's criminal in the state or in the city, depending upon whether, so just because you're caught in the city with less than 35 grams does not mean it has to be turned over to the city. So that is something else to be noted. I think you see here that Mr. Thurman had some conversation with the prosecutor as to whether he uses jail time in these types of cases. As a former prosecutor, I mean, we all want to have the tools that we're allowed to have to deal with cases. Same thing goes for the judges on the bench. But I think the only, so somebody could still go to jail if it got referred to the city or to the state, because the city has no authority to tell the state how to prosecute a case. Now, whether a lot of them will be referred there or not, I don't know the answer to that. But that's just something that I think is important to know in deciding how you want to treat the ordinance. Any questions so far? Or treat any change to the ordinance about the punishment? David? Oh, I thought you were.
I kind of have a question, but you have more to go, it sounds like.
Oh, okay.
Is that right? Okay.
Well, not too much. So basically, if there is a feeling that you all want to revise, like I said, decriminalization, I don't necessarily agree with the term. If you want to revise or reconsider what the city does as far as punishment, then that would be maybe, you're not required to give jail time. It's an option. The state's not required to. It's one of the things that is considered and one of the things that the judges and or the prosecutors can use. So I think that hopefully that addresses everything in addition to reading this memo, and I'm not going to read it out loud.
David?
I just want to make sure I understand it. I think it's right in the conclusion, but not sure everybody has that in front of them. But it says conclusion, if the city chooses to go forward with the issue of decriminalization, which we're talking about, it's actually still a crime. My recommendation would be to remove the jail time from the range of punishment and set a specific fine amount similar to the way the city handles parking tickets. I just want to say that I completely agree that I think that's what makes sense to me from what is a possibility of the conclusion, is to remove the jail time portion. It's not decriminalizing it, it's just making it so that something like this wouldn't send you to jail.
One thing I did want to clarify.
Unless you got sent to the
I
state.
believe that the chief, if RPD officer stops somebody, I believe that they still would have the power to arrest that person and book that person. Because this is not going to necessarily take away the fact that it could be a municipal conviction on their record, just because the jail time is removed. If they don't have jail time, that's fine, but I don't know that it would necessarily take that away. So I just wanted to clarify that. That doesn't mean somebody wouldn't get arrested, because the decision whether it's going to be municipal or state may not be made.
That's right.
So.
And I think what you're saying is what I think I'm understanding, which is it's more of a statement that we're making, less than the ability for our police or our prosecutor to make a different choice if they wanted to go state. But I think the most important thing for me is that we're making a statement, and we're also allowing our resources, which are already thin, to be put toward things that are already tearing our community apart a lot more than this particular issue, like opioids, fentanyl, methamphetamines, and we're leaving those treatment centers, the jails, probation officers, et cetera, to take care of those things that are of higher importance, that we're not thinning our resources on something like this. I think moving the jail time is the important thing to do here.
David, I would agree with the first part, but I think you're incorrect on the second part. In terms, it's not going to change the allocation of resources one iota.
It's the jail
It
time,
is,
that's
it is,
jail.
from what I understand from law enforcement, it's a very, very, very rare occurrence that somebody's going to jail for a small possession.
That's true.
The police are still going to do their job, whether they pull somebody over that's swerving back and forth or not. So, again, the first part of, I think, of what you said is correct. If we're trying to make a statement, that is probably correct as well. But I think when the rubber meets the road, I don't think we're really changing much in the real world.
Jail time, somebody's
Well,
jail time, that could really mess up their
But
life.
hold on, you're not listening. You're
Mean their
not
job, et
listening.
cetera.
It's a very rare occurrence. So somebody
But
that's,
if you were the rare occurrence,
you know what?
that would be
That rare occurrence probably damn well ought to be going to jail. That rare occurrence is not the kid with 2 joints in his car. That's the point.
Okay.
So I think just keep the whole thing in perspective. It's a statement, it's good, there are some benefits to this, I'm not downgrading that, but we're not accomplishing as much as perhaps we think we're accomplishing. That's
be
my,
better to accomplish more, you're right,
I've
I
got
agree.
2 questions for David, if I may. One, David, why would you want to take that tool away from the prosecutor? Why would you want to take that jail time away for, let's say, someone they've dealt with time and time again?
a good example is a known drug dealer. That's time that the cops pulled him over, just happened to have 15 grams.
Why do you want to take that
Why do you
away?
want to take that away?
I honestly think that this is just waste of our resources. I think any more than
In
going
my
going
example, we're talking
downtown,
about a drug dealer.
But then you'd have a whole bunch more to prove that it's a drug dealer. That's what a drug dealer is. A drug dealer is not someone who has 15 grams. So no, you wouldn't be catching a drug dealer there. You'd be catching someone with 15 grams. I guess that's all I can say.
Second question, why do you feel that the city council needs to make a statement?
Because I think there are potentially people that have been caught in these rare occurrences. And actually, when you do go to jail, here's a great example why. If you get a fine for something versus have to go to jail, guess what? You go to jail if that happens, and that's why I want to see this removed, is because that can have a serious impact on your life. If you go to jail tomorrow for something, and then you can't work for 5 days, your family's affected.
But wait a minute,
everybody
that is a
could be affected.
controllable situation.
I'm just saying.
Don't smoke the pot, don't deal, and don't do illegal drugs.
Well, there's a lot
You're
of other
feeling
illegal
sorry.
things too. You know, don't illegally park, but we don't send you to jail for that. It's all about the punishment should fit the crime, and in this case, I don't think it does. That would be where I stand.
I did have one question for the chief, if I can ask it.
Go ahead.
Okay. Chief, am I correct? Is it correct that when somebody is arrested or somebody is stopped and it's determined that they have marijuana or believe that they have marijuana, do you all have a set summons that you issue with them?
Yes.
So they
We
can
issue
post a
them
bond
summons.
right then, but there's.
We don't even make them postpone.
You don't even arrest them okay,
No.
all right.
They may be arrested.
They could
We
be
have-
for other
We have the
things.
ability to arrest them for that and release them on a summons,
Okay.
but more times than not, they're just given a ticket.
Okay,
And-
and I just wanted the council to know that, and I know.
Chief, you're
That's
here what,
typical.
3 years?
5.
5 years.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm in my 5th year. Time flies.
How many times do you think for less than 35 grams we sent somebody to jail in your 5 years?
I've never seen anybody go to jail for less than 35 grams. Now, we have arrested people for less than 35 grams, but like I said, we book them and release them. And that's pretty rare when we do that. And when we do that, it's usually, there's other factors involved in it. But I have never seen our prosecuting attorney for Rolla ever give anybody jail time. And very rarely, for a misdemeanor amount of jail, the state prosecutor wouldn't deal with that either.
So back to David's point about freeing up resources. If this passes, are you freeing up any resources to do jobs differently?
No, we're still gonna do it the same way. In fact, I did a check last year. We wrote 44 tickets for marijuana possession, for misdemeanor marijuana possession last year. And to stop somebody and get marijuana on them, even if we book them and release them, it's a 30-minute process for us.
And what would the fine be? What would the average fine
That
be?
is completely up to the prosecutor. I really couldn't tell you. It depends if it's their first offense or if they're a habitual. And they may get jail time. We haven't had any things where we get habitual misdemeanors. The habitual ones are the ones we catch with large felony amounts, and those are the ones that they can do some jail time for that, but not very much, not for marijuana nowadays anyway.
I can say as the district defender, the public defender's office, we would handle the ones where the state is seeking jail time. And I can tell you that since the law changed, I don't believe my office has handled any. I could check, but again, the state, Mr. Fox's office almost never seeks jail time on these, otherwise we would be in the case.
Okay?
And is it, am I correct in my understanding that you have some, or the police department has some discretion if they're gonna ask the prosecutor or want it sent over to the state? They have
Right.
some, if they have some reason.
There's unusual circumstances for that.
Correct.
And that being, if we stop them for a felony,
Mhm.
and they had the marijuana on them at the time of
You might
arresting them for the
all
felony,
go.
all has to go. You can't divide charges in a case like, and that's the only case where we would seek prosecution on misdemeanor amount
Okay,
with the state.
all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
So,
Yes.
so although what I'm hearing is on the other side is that if this would effectively, whatever the language does, it doesn't change anything that anybody's doing other than it doesn't change the ability of cops in order to stop. If they smell something, it doesn't stop their ability to use their discretion. No matter way, right? So if we change it, we're also not doing anything, but we don't.
By changing it, if it's just to remove the option of jail time
Yeah.
for a municipal offense, all you're doing is taking away the prosecutor's or changing the prosecutor and or judge's ability to sentence to someone to incarceration or jail time
Yeah.
for whatever period of time. That would
Unless
be all
they,
you would be
unless they
removing.
decide to charge them on a state charge, which would,
Well,
They're not
what,
deciding.
what's pretty typical, if it's referred to the state, based on what the chief is saying, and has been sort of the practice for years, is that honestly, if they send the misdemeanor to the state, it's only because they're sending felony charges as
yeah.
well.
Mhm.
But they do have that option, and the prosecutor has the option to make the request that the state look at the charges as well, if they wanted to. It's just not done typically, I understand.
Yeah.
So if we think back to a few minutes ago, when we were talking about changing the fine to update to the current state statute, will that not do most of what we're talking about here?
Just for 10 grams and under.
So for 10 grams and under, there would be no jail time, but for 35 to 11, there could be still.
There is per the state statute.
Okay.
I thought that was for medical marijuana license holders. That's what that's dealing with, right?
This, the last proposed ordinance?
Yeah.
The last proposed ordinance is creating the exception for the license holders because it is
Right.
not currently accepted or excluded
Right.
from being prosecuted right now. And that's, so it's just to bring it current with the new constitutional amendment.
But it doesn't.
But
if
it's
you
still-
don't have a license, if you don't have a medical marijuana card.
This is still.
You can still be prosecuted.
Right.
Yeah, it's just adding the exception.
What would be the steps to go forward with just removing the jail time for the 35 and under? What would be the steps for that? Need a motion for putting together an ordinance, or?
Well, John, I don't know, what do you, I mean, we're talking about that other ordinance, I don't know if that's.
Well, let me
that's-
answer the question. You have a vote, I don't. But I'm not willing to rush this. We rushed the medical marijuana thing through the dispensary and all that commotion, and I don't want to repeat that. My suggestion, my preferred method, is we go through gated decisions. If you're okay with this, and you collectively say, take the next step, the next step is a public hearing with law enforcement, maybe a judge or a retired judge to provide input, perhaps some subject matter experts, people that deal with drugs and healthcare providers and things like that. If you send us to the next gate, the next meeting would be a public hearing, so citizens could provide input. At that point, then I would say, make your decision.
So, quick question, the public hearing part of that is because, based on what we're doing here, it requires a public
No.
hearing? Okay.
Does
So
not require-
who would decide whether we get the public hearing? Is that,
This is my preference. You could take action tonight, and I could tell you what the end result is. If you pass it, I'll veto it. And then you can come back in a couple of weeks and override it. But in those course of the 2 weeks, I'm gonna go to the community and make sure the community understands that this thing, in my opinion, is being rushed.
right? And you'll probably do that even if we do the public hearing and
No.
and make that story as well? No?
Don't put words in my mouth.
Okay.
I haven't made a decision on this personally, to be honest with you. But what I have made a decision on is, this is not gonna be rushed. The community needs to think about this one. You know, we're worried about a very small group of people here, and I'm willing to do that, but not at the expense of the general public and law enforcement to not have their full day to provide the comments that they should be providing. It's your choice. I don't get a vote at that point. But I'm not willing to force this down the community's throat because a couple of you philosophically believe in this.
I personally just wish we'd spend as much time talking about opioids, fentanyl, meth, amphetamines, and the things that are really causing trouble for our community. And this is what I'm saying about this particular one, is that we're wasting our time going after things like cannabis, medical cannabis, when we could be going after things that really matter. And I think that's the statement that I'm interested in saying about that. But I understand what
You
you're saying about the
believe,
public
you
hearing.
believe one
Yeah.
doesn't lead to another. There's people in this
Sure.
community
Right.
that believe that opioid use and
Right.
everything else can start with marijuana use.
Or
I'm not
alcohol
a
use,
subject-
which is all around our whole community. So,
That's right.
Just saying.
I'm not a subject matter expert.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, I think we need to hear from subject matter experts.
I have a question. Do you tie this conversation in with our conversation about the ordinance and updating the ordinance to be consistent with the state criminal code, like
I think
Matthew
they're
talked
two
about?
different subjects.
Two different subjects. So, in the meantime, I just want to reiterate that it seems to make sense to have consistency and that distinction between that 10 grams and
I
that
agree.
35
Yeah.
grams.
Yeah.
I agree.
No, it's
No,
all
no.
together.
The state, our law does not match the state law currently.
So let's make it.
Yeah, it's, our law is more harsh, excuse me.
So I missed something.
And I don't think you, well, I was just gonna say, I don't know how you could take action on this decision
Yep.
today.
The state
Right.
makes a
But-
distinction between 10 grams and 30, like,
Right. I know,
under
but
10 and
What we were
under.
talking about
Yeah.
before was to update the,
Mr. Crowell mentioned how it doesn't match, and he would like
I heard that.
us to look into making ours match, and that was something that
Since
they
we're
were going
updating
to.
the
Since we're updating
ordinance,
the ordinance, why are we?
Make all the updates at once.
Yeah. And to me, if we clean this ordinance up that we were talking about with the exceptions for the medical marijuana and the paraphernalia definition, and make the fine and the punishment match the current criminal code of the state, to me, this goes a long way towards doing, making us consistent with what we need to be doing, but also, I think what David's talking about is moving in the direction of having a reasonable punishment for the crime, considering the Amendment 2 that was passed. So, to me, doing this amendment of the language, as we've talked about, is the first step, and once we get that done and see how that works, perhaps then we could take the next gate, Mayor, if we decide we need to do that.
It's your call. I don't want it rushed. If you want to go to the next gate sooner rather than later, that's fine with me as well. but we rushed the first thing with medical marijuana, and we're not gonna rush this one.
Well, I think this is the first gate. To me,
I
this
agree.
is
This is the
That's-
first
But
gate.
that's in relation to medical marijuana, right? That's not in
No.
relation to the
No.
fines thing at all, right?
No,
No.
No, it
the
is.
ordinance is the ordinance for prosecution of
Okay.
possession in the city of Rolla.
Yeah.
And what we're adding to it is the exclusion of those who have the license. So that's all that it was proposed tonight, or
That was the
suggested
original,
tonight.
yeah.
And then from it also includes the punishment. And as Councilman Crowell pointed out, there has been a distinction made in 10 grams versus 35 grams. And so my understanding was that you all believe that if we're going to amend this and come back for a first reading, the first reading should reflect the statutory criminal
Yes.
limits
Yes.
or maximums.
Yes.
Yep.
Which, David, might actually solve your, that you want to get rid
I
of
think if
jail
we just moved
time.
it to 35
It's under 10.
and under no jail time, I think, yeah, that would be absolutely fine for me. That would be what the final conclusion of this report was.
And as attorney for the council, what I'm hearing is that the mayor, before you change that, because that's not consistent with the law, is that there be public discussion and notice about it. But that's
Yes.
Not to put words in
Okay.
your mouth. But, anyway. So that's the distinction.
I agree with Jody. I think the first step is getting in line with the state.
Right, and then
Yeah.
at what point do we make any further decisions? I mean, are folks pretty much comfortable with leaving it at 35-10 as jail time? Because
I'd like
I
to
won't
see
push
the
it anymore if
language.
folks really
I'd,
don't feel
I'd,
that.
I'd just really like more time to think about it, honestly. Right, because this just popped up on the agenda for this week. You know, we didn't know when the opinion was coming back. I might like a little time before we make that next move, before we think about it. Just a little time to, just, a couple weeks to think about it or so.
And I guess I'd like to see the language written out.
Yep.
And see how
And get the
it's-
first reading done.
Yes.
Right,
Get-
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first gate is to address the first ordinance, so that's bringing it back, first reading, second reading, and then see where the dust lands, and then it's your decision whether you want to go down this path. Just take that vote, we'll go through the next gate.
Yeah.
So I think we need more action on that. Thank you. Next item is an ordinance.
Mayor, before we
Yeah.
move on, I was just gonna ask, could staff give us numbers of the amount of, like, actual numbers of the amount of, I know we had the arrests, but I'm curious, like, how much revenue we've generated in fines, and if there has ever been anybody sentenced to jail based on our ordinance.
I know we get the monthly or quarterly reports about the arrests, and those
Yeah.
could probably be broken down.
That was my thought, if we went through the gate to have law enforcement make a presentation, but if you want it earlier, I'm sure we can do it earlier.
Does the chief know how many of the 44 arrests were like under the 10, or not under the 10 limit, or how many? Because you said there was 44. Is there a distinction? Yeah. I would just be curious how many were under, the 10.
Now, under 10 on a first offense, it's an infraction, we're not allowed to arrest.
Ah, okay.
That's only on a first offense.
Only on first.
Yeah, second offense is a name misdemeanor, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So it's up to a year in the county jail or a fine of up to $2,000 if it goes to the state.
For under 10.
Under 10 or up to 35.
Right.
Already not arresting people for.
For the next meeting, could we also include in the write-up what those penalties are? Just so we know, because
The
I
state
certainly
penal-
don't.
All the state penalties.
The state penalties. What happens when you get caught with this first time, second time, whatever it is?
That would be helpful.
Just so we all understand that.
That would be.
Any other questions or comments? Moving on is an ordinance authorizing me to enter into agreement with Hutchison Recreation and Design.
So earlier, council awarded the bid to Hutchinson Recreation and Miracle for the Miracle Kids Choice Playground in Coventry Park for $90,000. So we want to asking you to approve the next step, which is have the first reading, and then at the next meeting, the final reading on approving that contract. Questions?
Any questions for Floyd? If not, first reading.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor of City of Rolla, Missouri to execute on behalf of the City of Rolla, Missouri a certain contract agreement between the City of Rolla, Missouri and Hutchinson Recreation and Design for Coventry Park Playground Structure.
Next item, under new business, is an ordinance authorizing me to execute a certain agreement with Javiation.
If you remember at our last meetings, we've done the grant agreements for the airport improvements. Those are all been approved. The budget's been approved. The ordinance we have tonight is a supplemental agreement that will engage the engineer to do the inspection. He also has some additional design services that were required as part of the rebuilding of that runway that have been included. This is all covered under those grant agreements at 95%. This project contract is $275,425.44. This project's planned for next spring.
Any questions for Steve? If not, first reading, please.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor of City of Rolla, Missouri to execute on behalf of the City of Rolla, Missouri a certain agreement between the City of Rolla, Missouri and Aviation Incorporated for aviation project consultant supplemental agreement number 1, additional design and construction services.
Next item is an ordinance authorizing me to enter an agreement with Capital Paving.
Capital Paving and Construction is the successful bidder on the contract to do the work. Their contract is for $2,999,250.50. It too will be funded 95% with federal and state grants.
Any questions for Steve? If not, first reading.
I'm sorry, Steve, I did have one question. My understanding is the 95% and the other funding options were already approved in agreements that were signed at a previous.
95%.
Okay,
yes.
just wanted to confirm. An ordinance authorizing the mayor of the City of Rolla, Missouri to execute on behalf of the City of Rolla, Missouri a certain agreement between the City of Rolla, Missouri and Capital Paving and Construction LLC for runway 4/22 rehabilitation.
Next item under new business is a resolution authorizing me to enter into a memorandum of understanding with Ameren.
Ameren, Missouri came to us about televising laterals that go to private homes from our sewer to the private home. Over the last several years, we've been aggressively going after inflow and infiltration in the public system. We've pretty much done our evaluations. We've got a lot of work that's planned over the next few years to line some sewers and do some upgrades. At some point in time, we had intended to shift our focus to the private system. To be honest, about 50% of the I&I comes from the public system, and about 50% comes from the private system. And the first step would be to televise the laterals and see what kind of condition they're in. Ameren's willing to pay us $75 a lateral, but basically all we're doing for them is trying to determine whether or not a gas line has penetrated the sewer. That's really all they're interested in. We're interested in a little more than that. We're wanting to evaluate the condition of the entire lateral system and make sure they have adequate connections. And we'd also like to make sure that there's a clean out at the right of way on every lateral in town so that everybody has good access to that. So we're actually going to be doing a lot more work than that, than the $75, but it's going to cover about half of our cost. And that's only going to be on the lines that they have gas lines around, which is only about half of our system. So of the 7,500 laterals we hope to inspect over the next, I say 5 to 7 years, I hope I can get it done in that short period of time. About half of those, and that's where we'll start first, is the ones that the gas companies willing to participate in before they change their mind. And we'll try to get as many of those done as we can.
Steve,
Yes.
let's just assume for a second that half of these laterals have a gas line nearby. So we're going to split half the cost of half the city addressing that with Ameren.
Right.
Are you intending to evaluate the whole rest of the city or
Yes.
just these older areas?
No, we're intending to do the whole city.
So if the Ameren portion is $100,000 for half of a half, then the rest of the city, which is on our nickel, is hundreds of thousands.
Right, it's probably in excess of, $1 million, $1.5 million by the time we get done doing all the laterals in Rolla. But that's gonna take probably 7 years to do that.
That's a tremendous amount of money.
It's a tremendous lot of work. But in comparison, we're spending somewhere probably close to $700,000 a year in time and money and effort to do I&I evaluation on the public system and the resulting in repairs. So it's really mandated by our permit that we
So I asked
engage in
John
these activities.
earlier, so let's say we check out a lateral. And there's really, as I understand it from John, two situations. Situation one is by current regulations what amounts to an illegal hookup. Somebody has the basement drain or somebody has the rain downspouts connected to that lateral, which when that house was built probably was okay, but it's not today. The other scenario is the line is broke. So take me through the first one. You find out that there's an illegal connection. The
Most of those we've already discovered by smoke testing. So those are going to be very rare to find ones that are still have downspouts hooked to the sanitary sewer. It does not exist.
So the majority of the cases will be number two, which means broken laterals.
Right. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what kind of problem it is. And I really don't have an answer in terms of how we're going to approach to get all these fixed. But I don't know that because I don't know how bad a problem it really is. I suspect that we're going to have to come up with some sort of city-sponsored cost share that would allow the residents some way to have their laterals fixed and pay that off
So
either
why
on
would
their
we do
taxes
that?
or on their utility bill. I suspect their taxes.
Why would this citizen who doesn't have a problem have to pay for this citizen who has a broken lateral on their property?
That's my point, is that we would have to come up with some way to get the people that have the broken laterals to pay for their own repairs. But I can't tell you,
Take
how,
that the way you
what kind
said
of
it. I
problem
heard you
that
say
is.
the city's gonna help. I don't know what help means.
No, arrange the mechanism to finance, it, like we do with the neighborhood
Okay,
improvement
so
district.
I'm a citizen and my lateral's fine. Why am I being a banker to the guy down the street?
You're not gonna be. The only thing you're paying for is the evaluation.
You're dodging me. You find broken laterals, okay, that are leaking.
Right.
What are you gonna do about it and how are you gonna
To
fix
start
it?
off with, I'm gonna send them letters and tell them that their laterals are in
They're gonna
poor
throw it in the
condition,
trash. Their
and that
toilet
needs
is
to be
flushing
repaired.
now. Steve, go away.
And then they won't do anything about it.
Okay,
And
so step
eventually, at
B.
some point, there's gonna have to be a way of requiring those laterals to be fixed at the owner's expense.
So we're about to spend $1 million not having that answer.
I'm only gonna spend $100,000 this year to kind of get started and see what kind of problem I've got. I don't really know. I can't tell you without just a wild guess as to what we're gonna end up having until I get a little more information. I can't make a recommendation.
I'm okay with that, Steve. But if the end result is this citizen is gonna have to somehow finance or pay for this
No.
citizen's lateral, that's
That-
not gonna fly.
That was never our intent.
Okay. I got that written down. Thank you. Any other questions of Steve? John?
Yeah, did we approach Ameren, Steve, or did they come to us?
They came to us.
Okay.
We're actually a little ahead of schedule. This would have probably come down the pike maybe in a year or two. We would have tried to get this started. But we're still trying to get the system itself done. The $27 million treatment plant improvement, it just, timing wasn't great, but the opportunity's there to help pay for some of it, so we wanted to go ahead and at least try a year and see how it might work.
I guess I'm just curious, how did Ameren get suspicious that they've been breaking our sewer lines? I mean, what?
Subcontractors.
Okay.
Yeah, we found several in our system. We televised our system, and we found several places where they've had to come back and repair those.
So
They just-
Steve,
They just drill right through them.
so your folks are actually gonna do the work of looking,
Yes.
not Ameren?
Yes.
Okay.
Worst case, they hire a plumber, a private homeowner hires a plumber to go in and clean out their line with a saw, and they saw those lines in two, and then you have gas escaping into the sewer system, and then you've got a real problem. So they're just wanting to, check the box and make sure that that's been looked at, and we don't have those kind of problems.
Steve, I have a question on the memorandum of understanding. Third paragraph says an agreement has been made between both parties to pursue these inspections. Is that a contract or another document that we haven't seen, or?
What are you talking about?
On the third paragraph, first sentence of the memorandum of understanding.
I think that's Steve saying he's gonna do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, once the agreement's approved, we'll have an agreement, then we can sign this. You can work-
There's no other document beyond.
That's nothing else.
So
In here.
would it be more accurate to say agreement will be made between the
We
parties?
can make that change, sure.
I just wanted to clarify if there was another document we didn't know about.
No other documents.
Any other questions for Steve? If not, will you read the resolution?
Yes.
Go ahead if you want to finish your.
I'm okay. A resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Rolla, Missouri to execute on behalf of the city of Rolla, Missouri, a memorandum of understanding between the city of Rolla, Missouri and Ameren, Missouri for sewer lateral inspections.
Is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Last item under new business is a discussion regarding Schuman and Berwan area neighborhood planning.
I'm back. All right, so this discussion sort of began a few weeks, realization that the majority of the projects I've been working on, the cases I've had come in have been in one particular part of town. And so in some discussion with staff, sort of has brought up that that particular neighborhood has a multitude of different issues going on all at once as well. And I'm also a proponent for neighborhood planning. I really believe that that's where the rubber hits the road and solving the city's problems on a local level. And so I've put together a proposal working with Mr. Butts to propose starting working on a plan for a section in Rolla here. So this is a area map showing the area that I've proposed. This is the two platted areas. One's called the Schuman Edition. The other one's called the something else. Actually, no. They're called, I can't remember the names of the plats, but it's near Schuman Park and Berwan Park. That's what this is. And both these subdivisions were actually platted the same year. They began construction about 90 years ago, and since that time, there's been a lot that's happened. They were all built out. Some parts near to the campus have sort of morphed from single family into kind of a multi-family type area. Some parts have started to sort of decline, but yet are close enough to the campus that they have opportunities for different types of development. And so that sort of brings up the question of what do we want here in this area. And so part of this discussion tonight is just to make you aware that we're wanting to start kind of working on this. This is the very first step. Haven't sought anything from the neighborhood quite yet. Another part is just to see if you have any observations or input. There may be a need for one or two of you to, if you want to participate, especially the counselors who are in this area, to participate in the process. And then if there's any desire to sort of change the scope of the project, since this is the very beginning, say for example, this area right here, if you can see the mouse on the TV, it doesn't look like you can, but there's an area just on the east side of Walnut Street that's actually there's only 4 or 5 houses that are actually in a different council, or different district. And so I was thinking maybe a good idea just to take them out of this plan so that everything is within the same council district. Or if we wanted, desire would be to use the railroad as, say, a dividing line between neighborhoods and focus on things to the east of the railroad for now and leave the things to the west of the railroad for a future plan. So these are the types of questions I have. In summary, as I said, it was developed about 90 years ago. Since then, there's quite a few issues bubbling up in the neighborhood. There's a lot of abandonment, some crime issues, but also the area is generally it's redeveloping. So we don't know what exactly the vision for the area. There's also something that's been noticed is a lot of the area is upzoned to allow for different types of development, but the zoning code also is sort of prohibiting the types of development that we'd like to see. For example, the people who had here earlier today, they bought another property. They required a variance to be approved by Board of Adjustment just to be able to develop the property to match the zoning that is allowed in that area. And so things like that, perhaps if, depending on what we'd like to develop in this area, may need some adjustments to the zoning code to allow for it. And also, in starting this neighborhood plan, this would actually be the first neighborhood plan, a true neighborhood plan in an existing part of the city that's probably ever been done. And so there's been some other smaller plans that deal with a corridor and the downtown. I guess I should clarify,
Yeah.
except for in the downtown. And but there's none that's been in an existing part of town. And so what this would do is if this goes well and you like to see more of that, I'd like to move on to start doing some other neighborhoods, and then at some point have the whole city done and stitch it all together, and that becomes the basis for a comprehensive plan for the city. So what I propose would be to, after this meeting, to start looking to schedule a neighborhood meeting, send out notices to all property owners and renters in the neighborhood, prepare a survey to allow for that to get their opinions outside of a neighborhood meeting. Sometimes people don't feel very comfortable bucking the trends at a neighborhood meeting, so a survey allows you to get more honest answers. May look to schedule a type of called a walking meeting. Basically, if people are interested, take them to certain sites in the neighborhood to see what I'm talking about for areas that may need improvement. Or something it's called a tactical urbanism event. Say, for example, if wanted to show what would a bike lane look like. Well, maybe you go out there with temporary paint and paint a bike lane, and it stays there for a week to show what you're talking about. That way you can work out any kinks with that, or if people really don't want to do it, you just don't do it. Then I would develop a planning document. It would probably take over the winter. It'd be more toward the spring when that document would be done. And then once the document is done, hold another neighborhood meeting to present what is proposed and make sure that's what they're interested in. You notice doing it in this way, neighborhood meeting up front, what it does is it makes the basis for the planning document that follows be what is received from the neighborhood. So I've found that if you come to somebody with a plan, they immediately start picking it apart. But if it's their idea, then they own the plan. And then from that, there would be a need for public hearings at the Planning Commission and through City Council. And then, but after that, the plan's not done. That's actually really the beginning of what happens. After that, there will be a need for some projects. What I'd like to do is try to work with a city department to see if there wouldn't be some sort of micro project just to start kind of kick off. Say if there's something that's cheap but really needed in the area, go ahead and do that right after, or the plan is adopted to sort of get the ball rolling. Or come forward with any necessary code amendments. So, anyone have any questions for me or discussion? Yes.
If I can make a statement for your question. Tom, I applaud you for stepping up and taking this as a project. We have talked about here in the city for multiple years, even with the intent of asking council to endorse a university district or something in this area, recognizing that it is a neighborhood in transition. We have developers coming in today because of building cost. They're looking at building duplexes and fourplexes and the conflicts that causes with individual homeowners. We've had extensive conversation on the amount of off-street parking, this overflow that's on the streets now, and in some cases, should we have parking on one side? Lots of discussion. So I think this is a terrific project. I'm going to ask you a question, but it is admittedly leading towards a request. As you talk about surveying the neighborhood, there are basically 5 groups, subgroups in that area. You have short-term renters, which are students. They're here for 4, maybe 5 years. You have long-term renters, is another subgroup. You've got owner-occupiers, which is the ones that seem to be the most impacted by these changes. You have property owners, meaning they're owning the rental properties. And then you've got developers. I would ask that as you gather your information, you treat all those 5 people, all groups, should have input and should be should be taken into consideration. But I think we need to give them context. I hate to say we need to weight them, but clearly the input of somebody that's a renter is different than the property owner. So I ask, as you develop that plan, that you recognize that. And I hate to put it with this way, that the student renter's opinion doesn't count any more or any less than the guy building fourplexes, but in reality, it is different.
When it comes to quality of life issues, I would say a renter's opinion is very important. And one reason, a lot of times, they aren't even involved with these types of plans. Part of the reason is because it's difficult to track them down. But
They need to be involved. That's not what I'm saying.
that's
What I'm
what
saying is, their wish list may not be deliverable. If it's not gonna work for developers, it's gonna infringe on the owner occupier, then what are we accomplishing? I think you need all opinions. I'm just suggesting that I don't think all of those opinions are necessarily equal.
Sure. And I agree with that. My point I was making is a lot of times renters are sort of glossed over completely. And my opinion about renters is, while an individual may be there for 1 year to 5 years, there's always somebody coming and going. And so when it comes to quality of life type issues, whoever is there at the time, their opinion is still very important.
Their opinion is important. I get it. Rachel?
Al, and I will say thank you as what I guess we would call a long-term renter in this very neighborhood. Sorry, I'm a millennial. I have student loans I'm paying off. I can't afford to buy yet, maybe ever. So first of all, I want to say I'm so excited for this. I'm so glad you're taking this on. I did have a question about when you're talking about sort of code adjustments potentially. Are you thinking about or contemplating anything related to sort of form-based code, since if we're thinking about also a development strategy that will help create that sort of density in that sort of university neighborhood, right? Like, is there going to be possibilities for looking at stuff like that, or?
I mean, I'm open to a form-based code. I have experience with that from where I worked at previously. I don't know if the council has any experience or knowledge with that sort of way of doing things, but just so you know, basically it flips zoning on its head, to where what's more important is how things look. It's less important what is going on inside the building, so density and most land uses go away. It's mostly if the building looks good and fits in with the neighborhood, then it's allowed to happen.
Yeah. And it can be built into traditional code, right? As from what I understand, or it can accompany it.
I would, if a form-based code was proposed for this neighborhood, I would recommend starting with a very simple, very basic one.
Okay.
Just to sort of see how it works here in Rolla. But something that works almost just as well is just some design requirements, some basic design requirements.
Yeah.
You can still change the setback to allow buildings to be closer to the road, which is what form-based codes generally encourage. You can still change the zoning code to allow for additional types of uses on a property. You can still start requiring things like porches and doors and windows that face the street. As a design requirement, without having to go fully into form-based codes.
Yeah. I also had another question, because was there sort of, what was the impetus? Because I think I'd heard that you were maybe considering doing the sort of neighborhood below downtown potentially. Was it just this area because it's so unique for the uniquely needs attention more than sort of the commercial issues?
Yeah, I wouldn't say more so. There's really this area, the entire downtown area, the core nearer to the downtown. All those are in transition, and it's all pretty equally important. This one's a little bit smaller. I think has a little bit simpler, even though it has some big problems. I think they're less diverse than in the core part of town, and so I think this was a good place for me to get started.
Yeah.
And have a kind of a template for how to proceed with future plans.
Okay. Awesome. I will definitely come to your meetings. Thank you.
Anything else?
David?
Just a couple of quick comments. One was just adding on to what Rachel talked about, and then you kind of addressed how you would go about it. But just one example that I'm already thinking of is, I know there's a lot of neighbors in this community and the one south of downtown that are next to, say, R3, and they're currently a small house or something, and then an R3 comes in, they've got 20 units, they built 3 stories high, and, you know, right next to your house is something like that. So that's just an example of one of the things that, like, I'm not sure that form-based code or one of those things would address, but I'm sure the neighborhood will have a lot of input. And I just want to say also thank you for taking this on. I think the idea of starting with this neighborhood is definitely one of the areas that needs attention and thought and community input. And I think the idea of doing this throughout the city slowly and kind of piecing it together into a full plan is wonderful. And so thank you for doing this.
Tom, how much of this area do you think is upzoned?
The entire area is either zoned R2 or R3.
Because that's going
And
to be
it's
the
mostly
toughest
single
one to
family right
solve.
Sorry?
I said that could be the toughest one to solve.
Yeah.
If council then implements it via a downzoning.
Yeah, that's part of the
And here's
thing.
my point,
Yeah.
you know, that may be what a renter wants, but that property owner is surely not going to want that.
Well, an owner-occupied prop owner very well may.
Owner occupied, very well may.
And that's part of what's going to depend. Part of the reason why I didn't want the neighborhood to think I'm coming with an agenda to start with, because there are 2 ways to go about this. There's a way to encourage redevelopment of the area, or encourage enhancement and improvement of what's there. And so, since those are very different, I want to start with what I received from the
How
neighborhood.
do you implement a downzoning? Is anybody quote-unquote grandfathered, or?
Yes, if a property
Let's
is
say
downzoned, it'd be
the
good.
picture is to make this owner-occupied or duplexes, just because that's what the people want, that's what the parking will accommodate. How do you go about those R3s? Do all of a sudden council take an action and says you're R2 and you're out of compliance, or how do you actually do that?
Anytime a property that's existing and is something changes with the zoning ordinance in any way that causes it to become not compliant with the zoning ordinance, it becomes legal non-conforming. Or grandfathered is the normal term. So they can keep doing what they're doing, you know, as long as nothing changes. They
Do
couldn't.
they lose that if they sell the property?
No.
No. They do, I think, lose it if the house burns down or something like that.
There is some mechanisms where if you tear it down, burn it down, and then there's some time periods and things like that. But if you tore it down and left it set for a year, you definitely couldn't come back. But if it burned down, I believe there's a way to still come back, even with what you had before. And even then, there's a way to go to the Board of Adjustment and ask for relief.
Very good project, thank you. Any other questions? If not, can I assume this is a green light?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. Next items, claims are under fiscal transaction. Stephanie, motion awarding health insurance excess coverage.
Good evening. This is the annual request to award excess health insurance coverage. And what the city does is we insure all claims up to $75,000. Anything above $75,000 is paid for by this company. Currently, as of the middle of August, we have 10 cases that have been paid over the $75,000. And so with the proposals that were taken by Hayes, which is our broker, we received the 4 quotes that are in the back of the packet for you. And their recommendation, as well as mine, is to award to Life. It's called Sun Life, and it's $534,598, and that's a 1.1% increase over 2018. There is one laser on that, which a laser means that we would go above and beyond the 75,000. But even with that laser, it is still cheaper than renewing with the current company. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Stephanie? If not, is there a motion to award the coverage to health and, I'm sorry.
I have a question.
Yes.
Because in the commentary itself, it's the bid that will best serve the city of Rolla as the QB renewal quotation, which doesn't seem to be the Sun Life. Is that?
Because the day that the agenda item was due, Sun Life locked their rate in for the end of the month.
Okay.
And then we didn't get it changed in time, but it is Sun
Okay.
Life.
All right. Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
So is there a motion to award?
So moved.
Motion and second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Next item is mayor or city council comments. Under mayor, I'm asking a motion to approve Dan Maxey to the Board of Adjustment to replace Jeff Rohr. Any questions on the appointment first? If not, is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion made and approved. A second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any other council comments? Citizen communication. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's right. Just, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do want to actually just ask about what the plan / when would we be looking at the center discussion or I know based on our budget discussion, it's definitely something that came to the fore. We have maybe 2 years left in our budget to kind of fix the issue going on. And I was just wondering if there's a time we're looking at discussing it or if there's something already happening or is the community going to get involved in some way? So just wanted to put the question out there.
There's a lot of work being done by the rec center board and staff over there. There's a lot of work being done and to be done. The most notable right now in the short term is a total implementation of a marketing plan, multifaceted, multi-dimensional. Another part of that plan is we're looking very diligently at the operations and the cost of those operations to the point of even getting some outside input. We're also looking at the area of the building that is the front portion, so not the fitness area, so to speak, but the front portion, and have greatly expanded the amount of programming that is being done that is to benefit the community at large, not necessarily a member. So the idea is to take that front part of the building and operate it more like a community center, if you will. So if we have programs in there that citizens could participate in, and even if they'd never become a member of the center, so be it. But we feel that's part of the overall mission, if you will, of the facility itself, regardless of the recapture. So we want to kind of play that out first. I think we would probably, I'll let John disagree if he wants, but I think we would come to council after we've done that and then also had a chance to assess options. I don't think we want to just throw it out there and let everybody try to just solve the problem just willy-nilly, but to have some thought and some program to come with you. But there's some interim goals that we've established. One of them is to get to a 90% recapture rate. We think that's really important. When I went to school, 90% was an A. I think it would be great if we go to the community and say, hey, we got an A. We didn't get an A+, but we got an A. And then there's other things that we want to evaluate, other completely out-of-the-box opportunities. But we think that has to go through staff or local management first, the advisory board, City Hall, get our arms around that and come back at a later date. I don't think it's a couple of months. It's maybe mid-2020 or something like that. So, John, if you disagree.
No, I was thinking we really hadn't plotted sort of that course going forward, but when I was hearing the question and discussion, my first thought was it's a 6 to 9 month part of the process. So that gives us about halfway through fiscal year 20. We'll know how good the budget estimates were, and we think we were very conservative on both the revenues and expenses. So I think we'll have a better answer for you in 6 months than we do today.
Great. And I think that sounds like it should be a good, like you said, time to get back with us and see what's come out of it. And I just to say again that I do think the community, obviously, it's a hot button issue. And any way we can include them, I think is going to be helpful for the long term. So maybe after that 6-9 months, we can look at ways they can get involved and give input.
The citizens are going to have to get involved because the citizens hold the key to the solution. Any other council comments? Citizen communication, is there anyone that would like to speak to this? Please. If you can, please state your name and address for the record.
Do I come here?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, thank you for allowing me a moment to speak. I'm Dr. Judy Ann Krenning. I am, the technical term is an otolaryngologist, head and neck surgeon. That means I'm an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I've been in the community now 21 years. And it's a marvelous community. Just absolutely couldn't be happier here. But I felt compelled to come here tonight because I saw on the agenda about the decriminalization of the marijuana. Thank you, council, for stating so clearly that that's basically a misnomer. I would like to state that as a physician and a concerned grandma, I have a freshman at the high school. I want to make it very clear, all of the research that is out there, it goes back 30+ years. Marijuana is a psychoactive drug. It is not medicine, and it greatly impacts the community that allows it to be brought in. I am completely against changing anything that ties our law enforcement hands. As you clearly heard tonight, the police are doing a wonderful job. They don't overstate what they're doing. They take it on a case-by-case basis. But in the ER, all across the United States, the statistics are coming in. Use of marijuana leads to psychosis, increased schizophrenia, schizophreniform, okay? It impacts our young people. In Colorado, where they have gone completely completely decriminalized, they're legalized it, IQ rates have gone down. The kids in high school, their grades are going down. They aren't showing up for class. Increased motor vehicle accident rates. This is not a harmless drug. And lots of research is out there now. You might be told, oh no, opioid use will go down if you have marijuana out there. Guess what? The statistics point against that. There were a couple other things. We have increased DUIs. It is a gateway drug. In the 1970s, when I was in high school, okay, one joint hardly got you anything. The THC component now is 95% pure. The people who grow this stuff have done their homework. They're smart. They have genetically altered the plant to be far more psychoactive. You will be hearing, and thank you, Mayor, for saying you're taking this slowly and you're going to allow public comment. I won't be the only doctor speaking up. Please do not rush this. It is going to impact our entire community, especially our children. Thanks for hearing me out. And by the way, I was here a couple of weeks ago when you were talking about the allowing a plant to come in, I think over by Old St. James. Mm-hmm. My daughter lives in Washington State. They live north of Spokane in a rural area. They now have 3 marijuana growing facilities and all of this, and the stench is unbelievable. Their property values have gone down. You should know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cronin. Would anybody else like to speak to City Council?
I'm Rochelle Burrell. I'm a family medicine physician. Every time we talk about kids that are getting in trouble, kids that go on to other drugs, they've always said they started with marijuana first. So no, that's not a scientific study for our area, but it shows that this is what's happening. And Colorado has put all that information together, and they have shown that the truancy rates, the IQ in our young are going down. They're not getting jobs. They're not keeping jobs. You know, this isn't the community we want. We want successful youth going on to be successful adults. And you don't like to be stereotypical, but you can imagine the ones that are smoking marijuana every day, and you've seen where they've ended up. This is going to happen to our children. So we have great medical things that can replace the marijuana. It doesn't have to be marijuana. I've done a lot of talking with patients over particularly the last few months with the medical certification coming out, and they don't understand. Unfortunately, the medical marijuana got passed without a lot of information of actual science and the evidence that's behind it. So I hope that you take in consideration the statement that you are making to our community.
Sir? There's someone back there.
Good evening. Sorry I'm not really dressed. I was remodeling the house. So my alarm went off and I said, oh, I wanted to go to that. Thanks, Mr. Butts. Just wanted to
Can
kind
you
of...
state your name and address for the record?
Yep. My name is Joshua Vroman, Ward 2. I believe Matthew and Ann are my representatives there. Wakefield Drive 807. But just kind of wanted to bring something up, ask some questions. Maybe you guys can help me get informed. You know, had a nice conversation with Mr. Butts for about an hour the other week, and just kind of going over the 2019-2020 budget, because I really went through and was trying to scrutinize and see where our money's going, because I know that we're asking for more money. We're working on a tighter budget. Our reserve fund is what's in. I think we calculated it was like 11%. You know, we wanted to sit at 25%. Totally understand. So, my father was a 22-year military police officer. My uncle is a retired fire chief. I have another uncle on the fire department who's about to retire. I wanted to say that because I want you guys to understand that that's the family that I come from. I don't want anybody to think that I'm attacking those entities. Just trying to ask questions and maybe get educated. So, you know, I've looked at the Rolla Fire Department underneath the Rolla City Org, and the last statements that they have are from 2006. It's 13 years old. I just sat on it, looked on my phone to just verify, you know. So, for instance, if I wanted to look up at the frequency of calls for 2018, I don't know it. How many fires did they respond to? I don't know. You know, how many accidents did they respond to? I don't know. You know, so these things that, you know, somebody's trying to look up, those statistics aren't there. The reason why I asked those questions is because what I did find out is that the Rolla Fire Department covers, if I'm not mistaken, 11.85 square miles. Okay, they have 30 full-time employees, or they have 30 slots. I'm sure they have 28, because I think there are 2 down, plus they have the fire chief and assistant fire chief. So they have 30 full-time employees right now, 12 apparatuses, if I'm not mistaken. They cover 11.85 square miles. So comparing apples to apples, I understand that one is ours. We are within the city. The other one is Rolla Rural Fire Department. We don't control that. That's in the county. But Fire Department, they have 9 full-time employees and cover over 200 square miles. Okay? They have 14 apparatuses. They have 41 volunteers that they rely on, and they operate within $500,000 to $1 million budget, where we're operating within a $3 million budget, and we have 20 times less the area than they do, and 3 times more of the full-time employees. So, you know,
Can I ask your point? Let me go back here for a second. And I'm not saying that to be critical, I'm trying to understand.
Sure.
So your first point about the calls for services, that data is collected.
Sure.
So council persons do see all the calls that they go on, and they're classified by type.
Right.
Okay, so you do have.
I just can't see it.
Okay, but it is
It's
available.
just not updated.
Okay.
The website's not updated.
The second point I'm getting a little bit lost on. You're comparing our physical resources with the geographic area versus our Rolla Rural's physical assets with their geographic area. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. 11.85,
And
30.
your point is what? One's better than the other?
No, I'm asking how one can operate with $500,000 to $1 million with 1/3 of the employees in 20 times the area that we cover.
I think there's a huge difference. I think, first of all, if you throw a fire alarm in the city of Rolla, correct me if I'm wrong, but you get everywhere in 3 minutes. I think that's the first 3.5 minutes. So that's one big difference. You're way out in the county, you're not going to see Rolla Rural Fire in 3 minutes.
Right.
The second thing is probably the amount of emergency services you go on. If you call 911 in the middle of the night and you're sick, chances are you're going to get a fireman before you'll get an ambulance.
Well, that brings me
I
to
don't think the county compares with that either.
Well, and that brings me to my next point too. So yesterday I literally had to stop. I was a witness, filled out, you know, the witness statement for the police. Guy got smoked riding his bike up 60. He was going 63 south. Lady was pulling out, smoked him. Fire department, EMS arrived within 10 seconds of each other. So we're expending, I mean, I understand. I'm just trying, I'm trying to get educated. Like, why are we sending a fire department out when EMS, who is probably more medically prepared to take care of somebody who got hit by a bicycle?
Let's defer to Chief. Chief, you want to come and answer that? Legitimate question. What's the answer?
So when the fire department responds to a motor vehicle accident or an accident with a vehicle and a bicycle or a pedestrian or anyone, there's significant possibility that the person's entrapped. So that's one reason why we would respond in addition to the EMS. The second is there's no divider between who can arrive first at this point of deciding. The dispatcher doesn't make that decision of who can respond first and be on the scene first. So they dispatch both, and we would arrive, some cases, just as he described, within a few seconds of each other, depending on location. But there's probably an equal number of calls that would respond and arrive minutes earlier before EMS arrives, because they're located in one location and we're located in two. The other issue with comparing us to another department is that we respond to about 1,500 calls a year, and the Rolla Rural Department responds to about 500 calls a year. So there's a difference. We also arrive with about minimum of 7 personnel, and they're employing 3 on their shifts. So the number of people that we're arriving with and our capabilities, in most cases, our fires that are structure fires are what we would call a room and content, where in other cases, in rural settings, not saying Rolla Rural, okay, so let me hedge that, is that it would expand beyond the room and content fire. Where room and content would be the fire started in the bedroom, we prevent it from expanding into the rest of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Where in a rural setting, because of response times and the number of people responding, there is significant more damage to the property than when we arrive. Couple of thoughts.
Next.
I mean,
So go ahead and continue if you have other points or questions.
Yeah, no, I was just throwing it out there. Maybe just some food for thought, something to look into. We're looking for money to help increase the general revenue fund and stuff like that. I'm not saying cut from the fire department or cut from the police department. We all know that we have problems growing in Rolla. I see it. I've got teenagers in high school, and so I don't know. Just food for thought. Trying to.
Is there anything you see in the budget or anything you see as a citizen that
You want me
not
to
being efficient? I mean, yeah, be honest, because I actually.
I'll be honest. So this is how I do my personal bills. I have 7 bank accounts.
Right.
Okay, because I need to know where my money's going. My wife, she doesn't take care of the bills because she just spends it. All right.
She what?
Yeah, she just spends it.
You publicly said that?
I did.
Oh, God.
That's brave.
Okay.
I thought I had poor judgment.
That's all right. That's all right. So, anyways, something that I would like to see, and this is something I brought up to Mr. Butts, and maybe now that I'm in front of you guys, we can, get more food for thought. So the fire department and the police department is currently paid out of the general fund. The biggest problem that we were having with the use tax at the meeting that we had for the use tax, the public hearing, was that it's going into the general fund. How do we know what you say is going to happen? You understand what I'm saying? So right now we're allocating $3 million for one department, like 3.2 for another department, and then you're expecting about 70%, probably, if I'm not mistaken, from the use tax to go to these 2 departments. All right, so what I'm saying is, what I'm suggesting is that, because I like to see where my money's going, I don't know about you, we're probably about the same age, the council can pass an ordinance or make the decision to open up another fund for public safety. You guys can do that. You can make one for the fire department, you can make one for the police department. Doesn't matter, because you're making a fund. You're not collecting taxes. I highly doubt that the constituents of Rolla would disagree with that. I highly doubt that future councils will disband those funds because they are a public service. So what I'm suggesting is that we open up these funds so we can start paying these 2 departments out of the police fund or the fire fund or public safety fund and see where our money is actually going, you can allocate 3 million, 3.2 million, or 7 million if you want to put 7
But
million.
sir, we do that now. The
Out of-
transparency of the budget is very transparent. The city has live accounting, if you will, so walk into Stephanie or walk into John at any point in time, and it's an easy question, because there are monthly statements, what each department is spending. And as far as allocation, that's done by council via the budget.
Correct.
So when council approves that budget, they are saying, you fund the police department next year this way, and you fund the fire department this way.
Understand. We're on the same page, and I think you're just trying, what you're telling me is, we already do that. What I'm saying is that you're coming into a generation that, you know, like Mr. Butts had mentioned, 20 years ago, nobody really cared because everybody understood that that money was going towards this. Okay? What you're not understanding is that a lot of the constituents don't trust any level of government anymore.
I'm never gonna change their opinion, and I sure as hell aren't gonna try.
Right.
If somebody has that kind of mentality, I don't know that we can do much more than to change that.
But showing where our, you know, if
If
you
we're gonna go through through life not trusting anybody in anything,
Sure.
nothing's gonna get done.
Sure, you know, just an opportunity, an option, you know.
I mean,
something-
I asked the question, so then what you're saying is if we had funds, like police fund, fire fund, and then all the rest.
Right.
Might be clearer to folks.
Sure.
But you have that now.
Well,
It's all in general
it's all in
fund.
general fund. Because what you're saying is that the use tax is gonna go to the general fund.
I'm saying that there's a fund, which is the checking account called the general fund. And
Yes.
within the general fund, there are departments. Stephanie, am I wrong? Right? There is a police department, and that's the funding mechanism. So whether you call it a department or you call it a fund,
Right.
it's functionally the same
I think what
thing.
he's also saying in case of the use tax, it's going into the general fund, and there isn't a specific saying that we're saying that we're gonna use it for safety, public safety needs, but the public could say, well, how are you gonna define what's needs versus then what's left over? And if we just had fire and police funds, and we put it just to that, it would be clearer for certain folks.
Correct.
There's a budget every year that the public will see. There's a ballot box, so a future council, if they stray and choose to fund not police and fire, but widgets, then you hold them accountable.
Right. Just an opportunity to kind of.
I hear you, all very good points. I think it's a matter of semantics, though. I think
Right.
we have those funds. We just don't call them a fund, we call them a department.
Right. I understand what you're saying.
But by all means, at any point in time, come into City Hall, and this budget has monthly statements that accompany this.
Mhm. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other citizens?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Curitan. I am the community liaison from Missouri S&T Student Council, and I live
You learned a
just
bunch
south of
tonight, I'll
town.
bet, huh?
Sorry?
You learned a bunch tonight, I'll bet, huh?
I did. It was a very, very interesting and spirited meeting.
And you're very tactful.
I have been a Rolla resident for 21 years now. So, and I just wanted to say that I'm really glad to hear that you are very carefully considering sidewalk improvements and expansions. I know that parking was recently cut at the university, and so encouraging alternative transportation in the university area is a really important thing. And also, there is a significant positive correlation between walkability in communities and the general health of the community, and so I appreciate all the work that you're doing concerning that.
So along that line, let me get your opinion.
Yes, sir.
We're about to spend $2 million on the pedestrian bridge. Your feelings on that? Need it, not need it, really need it?
Pedestrian bridge, where exactly?
Over going to the fraternities highway.
Oh.
Where the existing bridge goes over, if you're not aware, we're gonna spend $2 million right adjacent to it for a pedestrian.
An additional pedestrian bridge?
For replacing.
A dedicated.
Okay. A dedicated
Yeah,
pedestrian
so it'll have
bridge?
more space for bikes and walkers
Okay.
to go at the same time.
I say that because I find it very frustrating. We're about to spend $2 million. And just the other day, there's a sidewalk on one side, and I'm driving on there, and there's a student walking their bicycle on guess what side?
The opposite side.
The opposite side. And I'm thinking,
I,
for $2 million, this person's still gonna do that?
I definitely understand your frustration, but I mean, personally, as a representative of the student body,
I'm sending you a message. When you go back
How much more efficient was it to walk the bike in that way, you know?
and look before you cross. Your generation doesn't like to look both ways before you cross the street.
I'll try to get the word out.
I'm just having fun with you. I hope you appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
What's your last name?
Curitin, Cureton.
Okay, thank you.
Any other citizens? John, would you like to say a few words while you're walking up? Comments for the good of the order? You only want to have one, and before our next meeting, Celebration of Nations. That is, without a doubt, I know there's St. Pat's fans, but I would tell you that town and gown events, I think celebration of nations is absolutely terrific. A tremendous amount of hard work goes into that, both at the university level, city staff, downtown business association. It's a great event, and every year we have good weather, so same this year.
You just jinxed it.
I'm going to blame it on the new chancellor if it's bad weather. Any other comments for the good of the order? If not, we have no closed session, so meeting adjourned.
Yep, last Saturday.
John. Only you and Carolyn can say interesting.